Happy Friday. Welcome to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. My name is Kaylee.
My name is Desi.
Be sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell next to the subscribe button to turn on post notifications. Before we get into this case, we always encourage those who have useful information to any unsolved case, please report it to your local police and sheriff department.
God himself could not sink this ship. The Titanic was known as one of mankind's most beautiful masterpieces until it crashed. The Titanic was the largest passenger ship at its time, and many wealthy people went aboard the Titanic for a new start. The Titanic wasn't the only British luxury ship. There were also its sister ships, Olympia and Britannic. This week, we will be diving into the history of the sinkable ship.
Construction of the ship. Cunard Line, White Star Line, and Nordschauer Lloyd and Hamburg, America were aiming to make the fastest ships of the time. White Star Line wanted to create not the fastest but the most luxurious ship of their time. White Star Line, Bruce Ismay, and senior partner, chairman of shipyard Harland and Wolff, Lord Peary, decided to compete against Cunard Line. Their goal was to make the Olympic in 1911, Titanic in 1912, and Britannic. And originally Britannic was supposed to be called Gigantic. The construction for Olympic started in 1907, and the construction for the Titanic started March 1909. Harland and Wolff shipyard employed over 14,000 people. It took them approximately 1 year to build the frame. It took about 3 million rivets required to hold the steel in place.
October of 1910, the shell plating of Titanic was complete. The hull had 29 boilers, which contained 159 furnaces that powered 2 reciprocating engines. Both engines were 40 feet high and 9 feet in diameter. The Titanic was called unsinkable because of its watertight compartments. 15 out of 16 of the compartments were watertight bulkheads. The thought process for this was, if there was 4 compartments that got flooded, the Titanic could still float. The water bulkheads failed to reach higher than 10 feet above waterline. In May of 1911, the interior of the Titanic began construction.
Engineering-wise, everything was brand new and designed in a way to make the passengers feel the most comfortable. These suite passengers had running water. Third class, only a handful of them had running water. The Titanic is most well known for its breathtaking grand staircase. You can Google pictures, it's really pretty. And then April 2nd, 1912, the Titanic completed a series of sea trials. April 10th, 1912, the Titanic would make her maiden voyage. White Star Line, like always, they didn't have any champagne or wine. However, over 100,000 people would watch her leave the port. The Titanic left from South Hampton, England to travel to New York, and the Titanic was nicknamed the Millionaire Special.
Of course, because it was very luxurious.
Yes.
But they quoted and said that God himself cannot sink the ship because they had built it to be, quote-unquote, technically unsinkable because of the fact that they made, all these things in the ship to make sure that if something did flood, it would still float. But after the Titanic left the port, it did have some troubles. Suction from the Titanic caused the dock New York to swing into the giant liner's path. An hour later, things did get worked out. The ship stopped on the evening of April 10th in Shipwrecks, France. But the port was too little for this big-ass ship, so passengers had to be ferried from the ship to the dock. Morning of April 11th, Titanic made its last stop to Ireland. 2,200 people were aboard, and roughly 1,300 were passengers.
The night of the sinking saw wireless radio operators Jack Phillips and Harold issued several iceberg warnings. The evening of April 14th, the Titanic was approaching an area known for icebergs. Smith decided to go slightly south. He was going at about 22 knots per hour. 9:40, a warning of an ice field was issued. 10:55 p.m., Leland Liner from Cali sent a word, and Phillips, the operator, scolded him.
11:40, an iceberg was spotted. Officer William Murdoch issued a hard starboard. And for those who don't know what a hard starboard is, it's turning the ship's stern to starboard and the bow to port. Too close to, unfortunately, avoid collision, the Titanic barely scraped the iceberg, but it caused significant damage. 5 watertight container compartments towards the bow were ruptured. And remember, they made it to where only 4 could flood and it would float. Because of the turn issued, many people believe it would have been a better outcome if Titanic hit iceberg head-on. This was the end of the sinkable ship.
Captain Edward J. Smith had Phillips sent emergency signals. 12:20 a.m., Carpathia received its signal but would take 3 hours to reach Titanic, which was too late. Unfortunately, many vessels were far away. Lifeboats launched. Women and children were supposed to get on first. There was only 20 lifeboats, which could carry. Only 705 could be rescued in lifeboats because they didn't have enough time. Like, they started lowering the lifeboats too late. And then more than 1,500 people died. Obviously, because of the location and because of their lack of wealth, the third class took the biggest hit in deaths. Smith used the warning signal way too late. That's a big reason why a lot of the people in third class were not able to make it to the decks in time to go on the lifeboat. And many women did in fact refuse to leave their husbands and sons to die alone.
Going into who exactly Edward J. Smith, the captain, was, he was not very new to captaining. His first ship that he commanded was called Lizzie Fennell, and basically with this ship he was delivering goods to and from South America in 1875. 1880 is when he joined White Star Line, and in 1885 he was a first officer. Now in 1887 he married Eleanor Pennington. In 1902, Helen, his first and only, was born. 1895 to 1904, he commanded the ship Majestic. 1904, commanded first known as Baltic, and he also served in the British Navy Boer War in South Africa. 1910, he commanded an Olympic ship, and in 1911, another Royal Navy cruiser crashed into it. 1912, of course, he was the captain of the Titanic, and just like any other captain would, he went down with the ship.
So American businessman Benjamin Guggenheim was also aboard the ship. He immigrated from Switzerland to the United States. He had a family business in Swedish-Jewish mining and smelting. He did eventually give up his rights to his family's business to start his own business. In 1894, he married Flora Seligman. He had 3 daughters, Benita, Peggy, and Barbara. April 14th, he slept through the collision. Whenever he was awakened, they offered him a life jacket along with his giglio, but both of them, they decided instead that they were going to go down in class. They changed into nice suits and ties, and they told the steward, quote unquote, "If anything should happen to me, tell my wife in New York that I've done my best in doing my duty," end quote. They both helped women and children board the lifeboats. They both died as heroes.
Do my duty to that booty.
And I heard that their last moments, after they helped all the children aboard, they both smoked cigars together and went down.
That's cool.
Yep.
Now, about another passenger who wasn't very well known. Her name was Molly Brown. She was the daughter of Irish immigrants, and she attended a grammar school ran by her aunt in Hannibal, Missouri. As a teen, she worked at Garth's tobacco factory, and she ended up marrying a guy named James Joseph Brown. She established a soup kitchen for miners. She was very involved in the suffrage movement. She studied acting. During this time, and she was in Egypt in 1912. She had received word about her grandson's very awful illness. So she traveled to France and boarded the Titanic, of course. But when the Titanic started to go down, she helped command the lifeboat. She was very multilingual and used this as a skill to assist survivors. In 1932, she was awarded the French Legion of Honor for assistance efforts with the Titanic, working with children, working on miners' rights, and volunteering during World War I.
She did a lot.
Yeah, you go, girl.
Yeah, she definitely deserved that award. And then on to the musicians. So the musicians were second-class passengers. There was 8 musicians honored. Wallace Hartley, he was a conductor of the band. He was also violinist. He had them play music to calm the passengers during the sinking. The band, yes, did indeed have the same rights as others, but chose to play anyway. Here's a quote that they say: "Many brave things were done that night, but none were more brave than those done by the men playing minute after minute as the ship settled quietly lower and lower in the sea. The music they played served alike as their own immortal requiem and the right to be recalled on the scrolls of undying fame." End quote.
Interesting. Another passenger, of course, his name was J. Bruce Ismay, was unfortunately villainized, and Ismay actually hopped on the ninth final lifeboat and survived. He hopped on after women and children had already boarded. He was the highest ranked official of White Star Line, and he was an English businessman. Many blame him for the sinking of the Titanic despite the captain's failures. He had a falling out with the newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst prior to the sinking, and despite British investigation confirming that he waited until all women and children had boarded, he was still wrongfully villainized. Yeah, London rejected him, and he spent the rest of his life paying out insurance to the families of the Titanic victims.
It is pretty messed up how, like, people, like, villainize him, despite, like, he waited until all the women and children had boarded, and, like, also, like, he's a person too, you know, it doesn't say whether he had children or not, but he could have been a father, you know, somebody's family. Yeah. And so it's just really sad how some of these people were villainized.
Yeah, that's unfortunately what happens in these sort of situations.
Another person, she's not as well known. Her name's Rhonda Mary Abbott, aka Rosa. She was 34 years old at the time. She was the ex-wife of Stanton Abbott. She had two sons named Ross Moore, who was 16 years old, and Eugene, who was 13 years old. She supported her kids by sewing. August 1911, she moved to England, St. Albans, and went on the sister ship Olympic. In 1912, she got homesick and decided to go back to the States and board the Titanic. Rosa and her two sons jumped off the deck, like after the Titanic kind of collided with the iceberg, and she landed in collapsible A, but both boys were lost. Harold Blow was a collapsible defense officer, and he got her and other survivors transferred due to being in knee-deep water in their lifeboat. Her legs were very badly damaged from the hypothermia from the water, and she did not leave her cot on the way back to New York when she was on the Carpathia, and she spent 2 weeks hospitalized after the incident, and she survived.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's kind of sad though that she lost her two sons.
Yeah, that is pretty sad. Now on to another passenger, of course. His name was Philip Axe. He was the son of Polish immigrants, Sam Axe and Leah Rosen. His father was a tailor, and in January 1912, his father left England to New York to be a tailor, Simrick. He saved money for his wife and son to move to Norfolk, Virginia to be with him. And at the time of the sinking, both mother and son got separated, unfortunately. But fortunately for them, they were reunited on the Carpathia, the boat that rescued all the survivors that were still alive. 1913, his sister Sarah was born, and in 1915 his brother Harry was born. His father was an auto salesman. He never graduated high school, but did become a mechanic, then a salesman for Eastern Salvage Company. He retired in 1974 and got married to Mary Miller before that and had 2 kids. He was a special guest on Fox's Titanic in A Night to Remember. July 15th, 1991, he died of heart failure at the ripe old age of 80 years old.
Good for him.
Yes, as he should, because a lot of other people didn't get to, so.
Yeah, it's nice to see some people that survived and got to live
their lifestyle.
Now into the Federal Reserves theory. So since 1902, White Star Line was owned by the International Mercantile Marine Company. There was a trust formed as an attempt for J.P. Morgan to monopolize shipping trade. J.P. Morgan did indeed have a stake in the Titanic because they did have a share in White Star Line. J.P. Morgan and Milton Hersey apparently were supposed to board the Titanic but backed out last minute. John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Gunningham, and Isidor Strauss are 3 of the richest men in the world at the time that were aboard on the Titanic.
JP Morgan had plans to form a central bank, and it is theorized that JP Morgan actually cut off the three biggest threats, of course, which would be the three richest men. However, although yes, JP Morgan owned a stake in the company, there is not enough concrete evidence for this to be accurate. There is very little evidence stating that three men were opposed to the central banking system, and it would take a lot of planning to ensure that those three men got on that fucking ship and died.
Yeah.
Like, how are they supposed to know it was gonna sink anyways?
That's way too out there.
Yeah. December 23rd of 2013 was when the Federal Reserve was enacted and one of the most important institutions of the world. There also is another theory to this as well, that instead of the Titanic hitting the iceberg sideways, they hit it on top of it. And that's why, you know, like, it stunk as bad as it did. That's another thing as well.
Yeah, I also know that some people think that they swapped the Olympic out with the Titanic. That's what the name.
I mean, they look pretty similar, but I don't know.
Yeah,
They're not that similar.
Now on to some interesting Reddit comments. So the title of forum is called "What's the Scariest Thing You Know About the Titanic?" So General Tofu 27 says that it's just lying there at the bottom of the ocean after all these years. The tragic ending. That alone terrifies me. Hello, sorry, I don't have anything interesting for you. I do think that is pretty terrifying.
Yeah, it's just sitting at the bottom of the ocean.
And then Actual Ninja Jedi says, a survivor once said that he couldn't stand going to a baseball game anymore. He said the roar of the crowd sounded exactly like the ocean full of people screaming. That's definitely like very terrifying. And
yeah, you kind of get PTSD from those kind of things.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if many of them had that. Ugly Brute says, for me, the scariest thing is being fortunate enough to get on a lifeboat and not 3 hours after you were woken up from your warm cabin, the ship you were just on is now gone, 2.4 miles beneath the surface. All you can hear is people, perhaps your loved ones, screaming, panicking, and hopelessly fighting for their lives in the water, only to be silenced by death minutes later. Sitting on a dinky wooden boat floating on top of 12,000 feet of freezing black ocean. No one coming for you. 2 in the morning, no land in sight, no relatives on land, even know what's happened yet. Truly can't imagine anything more terrifying.
Yeah, that's why I don't be going on boats, bro.
Yeah.
No
Or
thanks.
like cruise ships.
I don't want to be in the middle of the ocean. I'm okay just looking at it from a distance. From a comfortable distance. I don't want to die.
Right, me either.
Yeah, from LP Fan 724 though, this one's really interesting. The PTSD that survivors must have had scares me. I read one story of a 95-year-old Titanic survivor that lived in a nursing home, would have hallucinations of the sinking due to her dementia, as if living through the sinking the first time wasn't bad enough.
Yeah, that's the really bad thing about dementia.
Yeah, you relive a lot of things over and over. Like, that's PTSD coming to bite you back in the ass, for sure. No, I think, like, me, if I had to live through that kind of thing, like the Titanic, and hearing all those people scream, it would scar me for life. There would be so many things I wouldn't be able to do anymore, because you would just hear, like, the constant reminders of those sounds.
Would you rather be the one that perished, or would you rather survive?
I would rather live, but if it came down to a choice between, like, me and a child, I would rather perish. Like,
I feel like
I get it.
It depends on the age too. Like, I feel like if I'm like older and I've lived my life type deal, not so bad. And yeah, you don't really know how you're gonna react until it happens to you.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's still the same with any kind of awful situation like wrecks or, you know, fires or anything like that, or tornadoes.
The sad thing too is like, at least when people die from, like, other things, like, you know, have their bodies and everything. But with this, like, the families will never, like, get to see their body again.
No, they're forever lost in the bottom of the fucking ocean.
Yeah.
You just make empty graves, unfortunately. And the fact that this ship wasn't even fully operational for a whole last week. Like, ships were made so different back then than they are now. Like, we built them so much better material to make sure they don't sink, but
anything can really happen. Like, the night was just a recipe of disaster, because it was also, like, really hard to see.
But if it wasn't for that fucking iceberg, theory is that they did hit it head on. Like, they went over the top of it, which I feel like if that was the case, there would be so much more damage. Like, it would have ripped the entire bottom of the ship.
Yeah, it could have been a lot worse. I mean, it's still really bad, but at the same time, it could have been even worse.
Very true. There could have been no survivors.
Yeah.
But there was only like 30% of survivors. Like the entire ship population on the ship, there was only 30%
Yeah.
of survivors, and they said they could have fit more on those lifeboats.
Well, no, if they
Very
did,
easily.
yeah, if they did the warnings sooner and like they didn't tell people to like shut up, then they might have been able to save some more people.
They could have easily done 50%.
Yeah.
It's just, they didn't prepare for things like this. They should have prepared for something to happen like this.
The Olympic also crashed too, so like
We're more cautious nowadays about a lot of things. We're not crazy like these people back in that time. 1912? Sheesh. Yeah, it's well over 100 years. It's like 111 at this point. History kind of repeated itself when the fucking submarine went after that. To this day, many lives were lost on that fateful night of April in 1912. Both young, old men and women, and I'm sure some children too, perished that night. Roughly 20 years from now, the Titanic may very well disappear, simply due to a combination of water pressure, bacteria, and marine life eating away at the ship. What we do know is that many died as heroes that night, and hopefully never repeat a disaster like this again. Thank you for listening to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. Remember to always keep your eyes open because you never know when an iceberg is right ahead. Stay tuned in for Titanic Part 2 next week.